Hi everyone, I'm very pleased to have Philip with me today. Philip is going to be talking about updates in Australia regarding how the immigration process has changed as a result of COVID-19. Philip's going to go over some changes that have occurred and also share some top tips. So this is going to be a great and full video for everyone watching. Philip, I'll pass it over to you to introduce yourself and then we can get stuck into some of the updates.
Thanks very much for the introduction, Avinda. I lead a practice of immigration specialists, which is based in Sydney, Australia, and we deal mainly with corporate sponsored work visas for foreign nationals, as well as family visas, and I suppose all the other types of visas, right up to refugee and asylum seeker applications in various tribunals and courts. At today's date, the situation in Australia is that we appear to have flattened the curve, so to speak, and we would now be entering a phase of trying to identify whether the virus is being communicated through the community.
Australia's had really tough past 6 months with the bushfires and then also rolling straight into the coronavirus. So I'm sure everyone in Australia, as in the rest of the world, also just wants a break from this and to get back to a little bit of normalcy.
Yes, that's right. It's been very difficult for the Australian communities to stay away from the beaches, and you know, there have been some outcries from many areas of the community that we've been a bit too strict, but in comparison to other places in the world, we would really have only had a lockdown light, I would say.
Right.
Some essential gatherings would be going shopping, would still be allowed, going to work is still allowed, travelling on public transport is still allowed, but the main thing is to really just stay at home and only go out if you really need to.
Right.
So, I mean, at this stage, it has worked very well.
And
but having said that, we can't be complacent.
How long is the lockdown in place for right now as it currently stands?
Well, yes, under the Biosecurity Act, control orders can be made, and the control order that has been made will end on the 17th of June. Okay. After that, it may be extended or varied.
Okay, so still in this lockdown light phase, as you suggested, for a little bit of time still, another 6 weeks or so.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, let's move into updates in the immigration space. So I think we should start with temporary work permits. What's the government doing in terms of financial support for any foreign workers who are in Australia at the moment?
Yes, sadly, there is very good financial support for Australian citizens and permanent residents, but for temporary workers, that is workers on visas, there is hardly any support at all financially. There is I suppose, a flexibility in that they can claim up to $10,000 in their superannuation pension fund, and that sometimes may help if they have any funds at all in their superannuation. Apart from that, the Australian government has given some grants to the Australian Red Cross. So the Red Cross is also able to help some temporary workers who are financially destitute, and they can help with accommodation and essential items and food. But by and large, the Australian government has said if you cannot support yourself any longer in Australia, then you are encouraged to leave Australia as soon as you can, because unashamedly, the Australian government is here to help the Australian citizens, permanent residents, and even though there's an obligation for a sponsored worker to be paid their return travel cost, many employers are simply paying a minimum amount in terms of air ticket cost, and the airlines are demanding 2 and 3 times more than what they're receiving from their employers. And I've had the experience a couple of days ago where the Australian Border Force has actually said, look, the person was paid an amount of money and we consider the matter closed. But when I look at the amount paid, there is no proof that you can ever get a ticket at that price to leave Australia at the moment.
So tough times for any temporary workers who are facing.
Very, very tough. There is a light at the end of that tunnel. Some temporary workers who are coming to the point where they have been laid off and they don't know where to go. If they are working in critical industries such as healthcare, agricultural workers, allied health workers, and aged care workers, they do have the possibility to get other visas,
Okay.
so that they can continue working, and that is some sense of flexibility from the department in terms of transitioning to a different visa.
And if they do want to pursue a different visa type, is there a period of time by which they should apply for the new visa type? Do they have a grace period?
Well, yes, the grace period, if they are sponsored on the usual 482 temporary work visa and they are laid off, then they must find another sponsor or get another visa within 60 days of the last day of employment. Okay. If they can't, then they must make arrangements to leave Australia.
Okay, so and that's really important, because presumably after that 60 days, you may run into issues where you're going to impact your ability to either obtain a new visa, or it may impact your permanent residency, I presume.
That's correct, because it is not advisable to either not have a sponsor or not have a visa by that 60-day period, because if you are found to be unlawful inside Australia, you are then liable to be detained. Immigration detention is akin to being in jail.
Right.
And once you are in detention, it's very hard to get out, except if you are removed then. And our detention centres are quite full, and it's because so many people are waiting to actually be removed, but there aren't enough flights to put them on.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Challenging times. So let's move into, we've covered terminations. Let's talk about any amendments. If an employer or a sponsoring company wanted to amend an employee's work hours or salary, can they do that? And if they can, should they be making those amendments prior to the changes coming into place, or do they have a period of time by which they can formally make those amendments with the Australian government?
Yes, look, in this current COVID-19 crisis period, if a business suffers a downturn, then the workers at that business can be directed to take their annual leave entitlements. Now, importantly, above the Immigration Act and legislation here is an overarching workplace relations legislation. And on the 8th of April, a Fair Work Commissioner made a determination that all workers in Australia, regardless of whether they're foreign nationals or not, can be directed to take half their annual leave at a half rate of pay. As long as they have 2 weeks of leave left over, they can be directed to take annual leave, and they cannot unreasonably refuse the employer's directive. Now, this determination has been made with the support of the unions. So it's very, very interesting how the unions and the employers have actually come to the table to try and work out a possible solution for people who really need to keep their jobs, but in whatever way possible, they either go on and use their annual leave entitlements, or they can be asked to actually take a reduction in hours. For a sponsored worker, they can be approached by the employer to reduce their hours, and that can be done by agreement, but they must be paid at the same hourly rate on a pro rata basis that the Department of Immigration has approved their salaries at. So that is another flexibility that is allowed. They could be asked to take leave without pay for up to 3 months, and that is also by agreement. The third one would be to stand down without pay. That can be done without agreement. And I suppose for an employer, I suppose the area of last resort would be a termination or a layoff or a cessation of the employment, and then we have the situation where notice has to be given, and within 60 days they have to find another sponsor or get another visa.
Okay. Now let's look at Australia as a whole. What's going on with the borders? Are they still closed, or if they are, when do you expect, or do we know that if they're going to
Yes. Look, the travel restrictions incoming are still very, very tight. So only very, very special exemptions are granted. A person who's not an Australian citizen or permanent resident can make an application and request an exemption from that travel ban. These would usually be people who are immediate family members of Australian citizens or permanent residents. Pardon me. An application has been made to an Australian Border Force Commissioner, and they would then receive an exemption certificate, which they can then present to an airport official when they're checking in.
Okay.
The only other exemptions really are for people in critical sectors who are needed here in Australia,
right,
or foreign diplomats are still allowed to enter Australia. Certain aircraft crew who have certified safety training are also allowed to enter Australia. But apart from that, it's a total ban. In leaving Australia, there is, I suppose, no restriction on a foreign national leaving, but Australians, citizens and permanent residents cannot leave Australia at the moment. And it's mainly because that they may not be able to get back. Yeah, so we have many cases where sponsored employees are stuck overseas and cannot get into Australia because they're not working in critical sectors. So we have to then advise the employers about notifying the Department of Immigration of that circumstance, so that the visas are not cancelled by the Department of Home Affairs. Similarly, workers who are here in Australia, who are, or not, perhaps workers from overseas corporations who are stuck here on business traveller visas,
Yeah.
they are allowed to apply for further business visitor visas in order to extend their stays. And the simple reason is due to the COVID-19 crisis and the lack of flights.
Right. And
Yeah.
how long would they typically be issued? In the US, if you were extending a visitor visa, you could request up to 6 months, but it's discretionary as to how long that would be issued. What's the
Yes.
guidance in Australia?
Interestingly, in Australia, it's very different. There are no extensions to visas. So if a visa and the duration of stay are going to expire, then you must apply for a new visa
Okay.
to get another authorized period of stay. So the clients are being encouraged to make the application before the current visa expires, and the department is being quite flexible with the stay period. What would normally be a 3-month stay period for a business traveller could very well become a 6-month stay period.
Okay.
And that's because the government looks at the current lockdown light extending beyond July or June, but travel restrictions wouldn't be lifted, I would expect, before the end of the year. And that's why some of those visitor visas are being granted for 6 months.
Okay. Just to jump back quickly to temporary workers, any temporary workers who are currently in Australia and they needed to extend their stay, what would be the process there, and when should they be applying for extensions?
Yes, well, I mean, the Department of Immigration is still processing applications.
Okay.
So they're encouraging people to make online applications. There are very few paper applications in the Australian visa program left, but applications can be made online, and those visas that are going to expire can be renewed, in a sense, with a fresh application. And yeah, that forms a lot of the work that we're doing at the moment to make sure that workers here won't be stuck without a visa. And that, of course, is dependent on their sponsoring employers wanting to sponsor again and extend that stay.
Right. And I presume when you have filed your extension application, you have continued work authorization throughout until there's a decision.
Yes, you do. Under Australian immigration law, if you hold a visa and you file another visa application, you are entitled to get a bridging visa.
Okay.
This bridging visa will come into effect once the existing visa expires, and the consequence is that a person will be allowed to then stay inside Australia until their new visa application is processed. It's not a travel visa, it's only a stay visa. If for some type of emergency a person needed to leave whilst holding the bridging visa, then they'd have to apply for a special travel bridging visa.
Okay. I'm assuming that'd be quite tough given the current circumstances in Australia and also the rest of the world. You may want to stay put if everything is going well for you in Australia. Let's move into permanent residency. In terms of any updates to individuals applying or going through the permanent residence process, what, if any, changes have there been?
Yes, look, the biggest change that I've seen is that the department is still accepting applications for permanent residence, and they are processing them. But quite often, there's a hurdle that has only just come about because of COVID-19, and that is the inability to get your so-called visa health checks done.
Right.
Because clinics are closed for those particular health checks, there have been very, very big delays in getting appointments for people who either have temporary or permanent residence aspirations to get their health checks done. So at the moment, you basically have to go through your online portal to then make a health declaration online, and then you will be notified when an appointment might be available. So that could be in 2 or 3 months' time, or it could be in 6 months' time. There is no indication about when they will be able to open up these clinics to conduct visa health checks again.
Now, during that period of time, let's say you can't get a health check for 6 months, will the government still review the underlying application, and is it worthwhile for anyone who's thinking about going through this process to still file the permanent residency application now, knowing that they will be pending or on hold until they're able to get a health check?
Yes, by all means. That's a definite yes. They should. They should not wait, because the circumstances at the time of application will very often dictate the basis on which an application is assessed by a Home Affairs visa officer. So that's really important to get the proper legal advice about their circumstances before filing, but then by all means file. Do not wait somehow because there's an expectation that there might be a long delay in visa health checks. It's better to have the application in. Once it gets to assessment stage, then it depends on the resources that the department has at its disposal. Some visa case officers I know are working from home, but by and large, we're seeing visas being granted for those that are working in critical sectors like healthcare, medical research, aged care, and agricultural.
Right.
Other occupations are not being processed as quickly as those critical sector occupations.
Right. That seems to make sense. What about other types of permanent residency? I think we discussed earlier skilled independent permanent residency. Is that still available, and is there any updates with that?
It is still available, but it will depend very much on whether a person can actually get their English language test done, because test centres are closed.
Right.
There is one provider who is giving an online sort of demonstration of testing online, but we don't know yet how they're going to verify the identity of the candidate sitting for that English language test. Obviously, there's a problem also with the health checks, but at this stage, independent skilled migration is still on, and I'd encourage people to continue their processes. Family migration is also definitely being processed. We've had a number of approvals this week, so definitely, particularly in the spouse visa program, usually there's a wait of 2 years for those visas to be processed. But look, if an application is complete and fully documented, and if people have already done their health checks, then there's a high likelihood that department officials will identify and pull those cases out of the queue and process them straight away, because
Great.
There's a program limit coming up on the 30th of June, and it would be good if they met their program numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. So still on the permanent residency side, still seems like good guidance to continue processing your cases where you can, understanding that you may be told at a certain period until you can get your health checks or your language tests done. Now, in terms of tips, I know HR, immigration, and mobility professionals have so much going on during this period of time. What would be some top tips that you would share with those professionals during this period to really focus on?
Yes, look, I would I would be looking very much at the compliance aspect. They really do need to have a look at their workforce, and they have to be attuned to whether the business is making redundancies and layoffs, because this is something that can affect their sponsorship status. When they come to reapply for their sponsorships, one of the questions that they will be asked is whether redundancies have been made, and what the Department of Immigration is actually looking for is a net creation of employment for Australians. And it's very hard, I know, for some businesses where there are massive stand downs, which is fine in the sense of from a visa perspective, but when it comes to redundancies and terminations, they are often looked at very, very darkly by immigration officials, because it basically means that Australians are out of jobs,
Right.
and then it means that there may not be a need to sponsor foreign nationals to come and fill those jobs again.
Right.
In terms of other tips, look, basically, when HR professionals are looking at recruiting a foreign national, whilst there is very little chance of those people travelling, it is a very good time to start planning, because when the travel restrictions are lifted, that's when people will start to, I suppose, have an expectation that they'll be able to travel. Interestingly, when a visa is granted for a worker, the visa start date or approval date runs from that date, not from the date when they enter Australia. So it's important to plan the estimated arrival, and that's going to depend on when the travel restrictions are lifted. But at this stage, we have a number of employers who are in that planning stage, and it's very important to have the right strategy in terms of what has historically been quite an easy process, but now you have the added problem that there may have been redundancies in that business very recently, and that would mean that that would be a factor that would need to have some very well worded legal submissions based on the COVID-19 crisis.
Yeah, and it seems like just even forward-looking, it'd be very prudent for employers to work with trained immigration professionals like yourself to really understand what implications having redundancies before they make them may have for the rest of this year, 2021 as well, to really kind of make sure they've got that understanding with the business leaders internally.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, any other top tips you'd like to share with us?
Look, also at this stage, it's important to know that the travel restrictions, you know, the leaving stage, it's very important about knowing where and what travel restrictions are in place. And that's not something that you can actually, I suppose, look up at any given time. They are changing,
Yeah.
On a weekly basis. So if the HR professional does have a contact with an immigration practitioner, it would be a good idea to go onto that person's mailing list so that they are provided with up-to-date information about travel restrictions. In terms of other tips, I would say that the compliance part is very important. If a employer is looking at reducing hours, we did mention before that those reduced hours are allowed, and the department would say that there is no breach of any sponsor obligation. Certainly the visa holder would not be held in breach of their visa conditions as long as the pay rate is still at the approved pro rata rate.
Okay.
But if a person is looking at, and it's happened here quite often, a percentage pay cut. Now, a percentage pay cut would mean under visa law that you would have to start and prepare a fresh nomination for the person to lower their salary. And that is quite an expensive process to do that. And I would say that it is probably better to use the amount that they want to reduce the salary by, convert that into hours,
Right.
and reduce the hours instead. And that would simply be done by reducing hours, pro rata rate, and then it's a simple notification only to the Department of Immigration rather than going through a whole application process again.
That I think is a golden nugget for anyone listening. Really important distinction, and I think a really strategic way around that, and very beneficial for a lot of employers as well to understand that. So thank you so much. Philip, if anybody had questions, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Oh, look, I suppose at this stage, email is probably the quickest way. My email address is Philip with 2 L's at yiplawyers.com. And in any event, if they search me up online, I'm sure they'll come across my name.
Yeah, you're very well known for Australian immigration. So thank you so much for spending some time with us today, going over the updates. You shared a wealth of information, and I know the viewers will be very appreciative of that. I myself am, so thank you again. For all the viewers, thank you for watching. Please like it, please comment if you have questions, and please share the video as well. Thank you, Philip, for joining.
Thanks for the opportunity, Avinda.